Good afternoon and welcome to Arts, Culture, and Thing in Between. Hope your week is off to a great start as planned and you're ready for what lies ahead. Thank you all for joining us, those of you who have, and appreciate that very much, appreciate you. And as usual, I tell you a little bit about the program, what arts, culture, and thing in between is about. So let me do that. Arts, culture, and thing in between is a program that features individuals who are gatekeepers of our arts and culture. They're not only performing artists, but also teachers, advocates, and scholars who focus on the preservation of the arts and culture. When arts is mentioned, it is being referred to as different art forms, such as applied, visual, or performing arts. Examples of visual arts would be like painting, photography, film. Examples of applied arts would be designing, as in constructing something. Fashion designing is considered applied arts. The way that a fashion designer works with the different patterns and types of materials. Jewelry designing is considered applied arts. The way the jewelry designer works with materials such as wood, plastic, metal, silver, gold, in addition to various types of stones. Furniture designing is an example of applied arts. And I slowed my roll there just now because over to my left shoulder, your right, is sitting the Guyana flag made out of wood. And that was made by someone who is a Guyanese craftsman, furniture craftsman. And that's his handiwork. So the way that the various types of woods are used, cut, layered, designed, this is a really good example of the way that applied arts work. Performing arts, on the other hand, has to do with music, theater, opera, drama, singing, stand-up comedy, and dance. These are just a few. When culture is mentioned, the middle name of the program, arts, culture, and thing in between. When culture is mentioned, it generally means the way of life for a particular group of people. So for this program, it is inclusive to mean the various groups of individuals that embrace ways of life. In other words, looking at attitudes and behaviors. What is important to note, though, is that as culture is mentioned, I'm really looking at how practices are passed from one generation to another. Thing in between, the last part of the name of the program. This has to do with life's issues that affect the execution of the arts and cultural practices. This involves both positive and negative experiences that become part of the creative process. Today's guest, I can assure you, has experienced so much of what I have just shared with you about arts, culture, and thing in between. But before we meet him, let me read his bio. Terry Boddie is an expert who has been in the arts arena of photography for over 40 years. He's a photographer, multidisciplinary artist, scholar, and educator who hails from the Caribbean island of Nevis, found in Eastern Caribbean. During his childhood, he was involved in activities such as playing cricket, making kites, and setting bird traps, which he sees as an integral part of his arts and culture of the Caribbean. He attended Brown Pasture Primary School, where he was on the cricket team, and then Gingerland Secondary School until he entered fifth form when he migrated to the United States in 1980. Upon arrival in the United States, Terry continued his education at William Howard Taft High School in the Bronx, New York, and was allowed to attend John F. Kennedy another high school where he had the opportunity to take courses that were not offered at Tufts. Those courses were photography and graphic design. At the same time, while at Tufts, he was placed in specialized gym class for fencing. This new experience resulted in him gaining a spot on his high school's fencing team. And by the time he was a senior, he became one of the city's top sought fencers. Following his completion of high school, he attended New York University to School of the Arts, where in 1989, he achieved a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Photography. A memorable experience at New York University was his recruitment to become a team player on New York University's fencing team, where there was a guaranteed starting position for him. He continued fencing post-graduation. Terry's always worked in the artistic arena of photography. From 1987 to 1989, for a few semesters while an undergraduate student at New York University, he interned at J.C. Penney's photography division. Throughout college and thereafter, he freelanced as a photographer, doing mostly analog black and white photos, commercial work, weddings, fashion images, and headshots. In 1991, he landed his first paid job at Fairchild Publications in New York City as a darkroom printer, where he stayed until 1999. While working at Fairchild Publications from 1993 to 1997, Terry attended Hunter College, where he earned a Master of Fine Arts in Combined Media, known today as Multidisciplinary Arts. After achieving his Master of Fine Arts in 1998, he became an adjunct at his alma mater, New York University, and was hired by SUNY Stony Brook, where he taught foundational and intermediate courses in photography. He left Stony Brook after spending approximately 4 years and continued teaching at New York University to date. From 2002 to 2008, Terry was a visiting assistant professor at William Patterson University in New Jersey, where he taught undergrad and grad courses. These photographic courses spanned analog, digital, and alternative process, like historical processes. In 2012, he was offered a position at SUNY Empire State College, also as a visiting assistant professor, where he teaches a few courses, including, but not limited to, contemporary photography, photographic narratives, and history of Black photographers, 1840 to present. In addition to Terry sharing his expertise in the classroom as an adult educator, he has also exhibited his work. In 1989, his first exhibition was held at 4th Street Photo Gallery as a fine arts photographer. His theme was about his feelings of alienation in New York City and the psychological impact of feeling isolated while not quite grounded in the urban environment in New York City. This was portrayed through analog or black and white photography. In 1997, after graduating with his Master of Fine Arts, Terry considered himself a professional artist who had secured the language to speak to his work. It is noteworthy that his works explore historical and contemporary aspects of memory, migration, and globalization refracted through his experience as a first-generation immigrant. He experiments with different disciplines in search of a language that transcends our traditional notions of a photograph, hence blurring the distinctions among photography, drawing, and painting. Some of Terry's work includes gelatin silver, The Shadow of Houses, 9 New Jersey Photographers, Birth of a Cipher, Here Residual, Memories of a Triple Migration, Panyard, Infinite Island, Creole Factory, Wrestling with the Image, Prison Art Fair, Trajectories, Wall-to-Wall News, The Coal Man, and Blueprint Series. In 1989 to present, Terry's work has been exhibited nationally and internationally. Nationally, lovers of the arts were able to view his bodies of work at the Wilma Jennings Gallery in New York City, the Paul Robeson Gallery in New Jersey, Newark Museum in New Jersey, the Museum of the Americas in Washington, D.C., the Zora Neale Hurston National Museum of Fine Arts in Eatonville, Florida, the Reginald F. Lewis Museum in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia African American Museum, the Studio Museum in Harlem, New York, the Bronx Museum of the Arts, the Anacostia Museum, part of the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., Smack Mellon Studios in Brooklyn, New York, Rush Arts Gallery in New York City, Center for Photography at Woodstock in New York, Jersey City Museum in New Jersey, the Noise Museum, Oceanville in New Jersey, and SUNY Empire State College Gallery in New York City. Internationally, his work has been displayed at Parc Lafayette in Paris, Museo Arte de Moderno in Santo Domingo, and the United States Embassy in Chad, Central Africa. In addition, some of his works are in public and private collections. Terry has been awarded for his work. His recognitions span being the artist in residence and the recipient of fellowships and grants that include and are not limited to the following: the Artist in Residence Studio Museum in Harlem in 1999, the New York State Foundation for the Arts Fellowship in 2000. Also in 2000, Emerge 2000 Algira Center for Contemporary Arts, Newark, New Jersey, the Artist in Residence, the Center for Photography in Woodstock in 2002, the Artist in Residence, the Center for Book Arts in 2009, the George and Helen Siegel Foundation Photography Grant in 2011, and the New Jersey Council on the Arts Fellowship for this year, 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I am pleased to welcome today's guest, Terry Boddie, to the program. But first, let's take a peek at him. Terry, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Roz. Thank you for having me. And thank you to your audience for coming to spend some time with us this afternoon.
Yeah, I have some really close friends who come on every Sunday or almost every Sunday. I see Malcolm is in the room. Dudley's in the room, who you know well. See Howard Larima is there, Sandra Primus. Thank you guys for starting off early with us and welcome. So Terry, we just watched your growth through pictures.
Oh my goodness, it's somewhat embarrassing to see yourself, on display like that. It's funny. Being a photographer, you would think, right? That
Right, right.
I would love the lens, but it's actually completely the opposite. But
I think it's a thing with artists though, I think it's a thing with artists. They just want their work to be showcased and that's it.
absolutely, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So you're not alone.
Yes, I'm sure I'm in good company for that's concerned.
Yeah, I told Terry, you're
Yeah.
from the small island Nevis. I'm sure you hear that all the time.
Small island, yes. We get branded with that descriptive, yes.
Yeah, but a lot of great things happen in Nevis.
Absolutely. Yes, Nevis actually has its reputation, if you will, within the Caribbean as well. And interestingly enough, just for those of you who do not know, so the late and great Cicely Tyson have her roots in Nevis.
All right, now claim it.
Yeah, there's exceptional individuals, even if they skip a generation, who have come out of Nevis. So yes.
Yeah, it's funny you said that. Because I don't think a lot of emphasis was placed on where she was from, for the most part, as an icon, right? But when she died, we Caribbean folks claimed her nicely.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But I think, it's because I think most of her life obviously is spent here. That's to be expected. But, she was very clear about, where her roots were. She's gone back, quite a few times herself to Nevis. So, but she didn't hide it. It's just that other people didn't highlight it.
Yeah, yeah. So talking about going back and all of that, I have to ask you, after you mentioned that you were embarrassed looking at your journey through life, through pictures, and Raul is in the room, he's saying, nice intro, nothing embarrassing about it. So your buddy
Thank you all.
is normalizing it for you. So what sticks out in your memory of your days in Nevis, Terry?
I have very visceral memory, and that memory informs a lot of what I do as a visual artist. I think one of my central memories have always been like almost like existing under this canopy of blue and rooted in this, almost like this carpet of green. So, everything except for obviously the rainy season, right? It was blue and green, right? So those are the colors of my childhood, if you will.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it was just, being one with nature whenever I wanted to. So the natural environment was a huge part of my upbringing.
Yeah.
I grew up in the rural area in Nevis. My mother, who I grew up with, was a farmer. She was a farmer, and she grew things. She was an amazing botanist. That wasn't the name that she claimed, but that's the name that I recognized that she occupied. So my childhood was, maybe it was just, when you were young, everything is joy, right? So my childhood was, a childhood filled with joy and play, and I bring some of that same joy and play to my own work.
Nice, nice. I like it. So in some ways you are here, we don't know, but you're here playing, and it looks like work to us.
Yes, yeah. But it's serious play, right? Like, for example, we'll talk about this later, but like cricket is play, but so much significant in that game.
Yeah.
So play should not be somehow perceived as something that's not serious. It's just that it's the joy with which you play, that sustain and afford depth to what you're doing. But it's not just fun and games, right?
I love it. I like that. What was your first exposure to the arts, Terry, that you can remember?
So I think formerly, like all of us, it was within the context of school, right? But I expand my perception of what the arts are to, those things that you did as a child that maybe, again, we think of as play, right? So, making our own toys and the craft and attention to which we afforded that practice, because that's what it was. It was practice. Every year you're making the same toys and you're getting better and better at it. Uh, and those the amount of attention that doing that requires teaches you how to shape things, how to basically make sculptural objects, which again, because it was in a formal context, we didn't think of it as sculpture in that sense.
Yeah.
But I just remembered making kites, making spinning tops, setting traps for birds and small animals, and yeah, again, the attention to which I gave those things that we considered play, but in retrospect, when I look back, there were things that prepared me for my own visual practice, because it required attention, it required focus.
As you said that, I reflect on um, a very renowned Guyanese sculptor. I think I mentioned him to you, Ivor Tom.
Mm.
As a boy in Victoria Village, the first village bought by slaves in Guyana,
Mhm.
he played with mud.
Yeah.
He played with mud. That's where he got his humble beginnings. My buddy Jagger, who was a musician, he's great at playing drums, especially the djembe. He was
Mhm.
playing on empty cans, that kind of a thing. And that's where the artistic
That's
pieces.
yeah, and that is the entry point, right? That's the entry point a lot of us get into the formal arts, if you will. And so yeah, we should not shy away from embracing those things as part of who we are in terms of our growth, into this arena of being, professional artists.
Who influenced you as a child?
I think probably my first influence, my primary influence was, I would have to say, my grandmother. I mean, she was like the best example I had for how to show up and be focused and be present when something had to be done. Uh, so that's, for me, was one of my primary role model, my influence for how to to live a life. And I won't get into all the details of it, but she more than anything else would just encourage us as children, my sisters and I, to to just be present and attentive to what you do. Well, one of the things that she said, which I torture my kids with, because I say to them all the time, is don't let the sun find you in bed. That was one of the sayings. Like, basically early to bed, early to rise.
Yeah. You sure your grandmother wasn't my father and mother and my grandparents?
Exactly. But that's that generation, right? Those generations going back, that was their mantra, when
Yeah,
things to be done, you had to show up and be present.
yeah. Now, you played cricket that you alluded to, right? Just now, as you were talking, you made kites. You said bird traps. I mean, the bird lovers, would love to hear that. Which you see as an integral part. You did those things, and you talk about those being entry points, kind of into the arts. You see that as an integral part. You see those as integral part of the arts and Caribbean culture.
Yes.
Of the three, and I probably am putting you on the spot now. Of the three, playing cricket, uh, making kites, setting bird traps, which one is at the top of the list for you?
I mean, that's a hard one,
I
right?
know I
That
say
is
that.
a
I
hard one.
say
Oh my God. And you're not gonna give me any out at all, right? Okay. All right. If I had to pick one, if I had to pick one, I would probably have to say kites. And because that's the practice, that's the activity that has stayed with me longest,
Mhm.
right? I still make kites now, but I make them for a different type of purpose than I did as a young boy.
Yeah,
Them to to fly during Easter, which is actually the season for kite flying right now.
yeah, Yeah.
yeah, and of course, I love cricket, but cricket didn't stay with me when I came here, except as a spectator.
Mhm. Well, it's funny you mentioned cricket again because I'm going to really tiptoe around this whole athletic piece of you. So
Okay.
you were in high school. As a matter of fact, your high school education was cut in Nevis
Yes.
because of migration. You came
Yes.
to the US in 1980. And when you arrived in the US, you attended William Howard Taft High School in the Bronx and
Mhm.
eventually became a part of the fencing team. Terry, until those pictures that we showed,
Right,
I
right.
could imagine you with a, I mean, is
Yeah.
it a sword that you use? What is it called?
It's a foil. So there are three weapons. There's the foil, the epee, and the saber. And my weapon was the foil. Uh, and yeah, it's not something that I talk about much. I mean, there I have the awards and the pictures to document it, but unless someone asks about it, it's not something that I really.
Well, I am asking for you
Okay.
to quickly tell me a little bit about fencing because I don't know. You mentioned three. Is it what is it? Weapons,
So
tools? What do you call it?
we call them weapons, and they're basically what they are these tools. You can call them that as well. That are distended from actual weapons that were used in combat. So the foil was a practice weapon that you would use before you fence a duel, which you would use the epee to fence. Sometimes you fence duels with the foil as well, but it was more like sort of like a decorative practice weapon or like a court weapon that you would use for dress. And then the saber was a cavalry weapon, which you would basically run at or gallop at full gallop at your opponent on horseback
Okay.
and just basically fight with this saber. And so all three of them have different target areas that's particular to their use. And I just happened to be introduced to the foil and stuck with it.
Wow.
But it's an interesting way that I got into the class. I mean, I was put into this class because, I mean, I just as a young immigrant boy going to high school, I didn't think I had a choice as to which gym class I can go into. And so when I was placed in this gym class, I just said yes. And it turned out that what happened was the coach, the fencing coach, would ask the program office to sort of send him basically students to fill the specialized gym class, and from that class would come the fencing team. So I just happened to work hard and eventually was invited to be a part of the fencing team.
Yeah, and then big things happen after that because by the time you turned senior, NYU was waiting for you plus others. You were one of the top fencers in the
Yeah,
city.
I think for me it was being I became good at fencing because I just stuck with it. It was one of those things that you were told to do something, or you were given the opportunity to do something, and you just give it your best. And I was fascinated with it. I was always, as a child, I was always, I think, like with like most maybe young males, really fascinated with martial arts. And so for me, this is a sort of martial art. And the discipline, though, that it required was something that I found challenging, but also I found rewarding because I could see the results. Every term that I applied myself at fencing, I could see the result in terms of the bouts that I was winning. We call them bouts. And the medals that we got. So by the time I was a senior, we were like the best fencing team, high school fencing team in the entire
Mhm.
city. But we had won the city championship like 3 out of my 4 years on the team. And
Nice.
so it was an amazing experience, And
Nice.
yeah, I got spoiled because I just expected to win all the time. So,
Wow, an experience that stays with you for life. When last did you fence?
So it's been a while. The last time I fenced, I would say maybe was about 5 years ago, and it was in an alumni match. So we would go every year there's an alumni match at NYU. All of the alumni come together, and there's a portion where the alumni fence the current team members. Just show them, like, listen, we still got something. And so I fenced that year, and it was really remarkable, to know that I still had. I may not have the same foot speed, but my arm speed, which was one of my hallmarks, is still there. Now my son is involved in fencing, so all of my energy is into coaching and.
Interesting. Can't wait to read about your son. So I have to ask you about Nevis. Do you visit often?
I try. My goal have always been to not spend more than 2 years away, and that was because when I came back to Nevis for the first time after I left, it was 16 years. The time I left and the time I went back for the first time. And that has such a profound impact on me that I told myself that I cannot stay away that long. And so I would go back every 2 years. But I haven't been back because of other commitments for about 5 years now. So I'm sort of past my sort of self-imposed deadline. But I'm hoping to be back this year, possibly, if not the next year, because for me it's a journey of renewal.
Yeah.
When I go back and touch the ground, touch the soil, touch the water, hike in the rainforest, something. It's like a reset button. I have hit a reset button.
Yeah.
And I've sort of like reinforced and fused myself with the fortitude that I need to sort of survive in this psychic environment, which is the only thing that I can describe in North America.
Don't you love it though, when you go back home, everything appears to be in slow motion?
Yes.
You can relax, you can breathe.
Absolutely. And something, that is something that I had to, like, purposefully tell myself, because the speed at which you move here in North America is not the same speed that people move in other parts of the world, and definitely not in the Caribbean. And so when I go back, I would literally, like, recognize that I'm moving at a different rate of speed than everyone else, and then I would correct for it. And maybe it's my perception of photographic rate of speed that you need to freeze emotion in time that maybe hyper aware of it. I don't know. But I would recognize it and I would immediately, correct myself. But after a week, like I've essentially settled into the vibration of the island. And so it doesn't take much for me to sort of reset. And that's one of the reasons why I go back.
Wow, that's a nice reflection, on your upbringing. Why don't we take a peek of your work, your body of work, and then come back and chat some more?
Yeah.
Okay. For those of you who are just joining us or joined us late, I am sitting with Terry Boddie, who is an artist. If we want to get fancy, a multidisciplinary artist, and he's going to tell us what that means. He's also a scholar, an educator, and a photographer at heart. We just saw your body of work that I believe you call that Island in the Sun.
Yes, an island in the sun.
It's an island.
Yeah, because it's kind of related to uh, the title of a book of literature that when I was in secondary school. Uh, it was called The Sun's Eye, and I kind of, you know, put those two things together because that particular book of literature was focused on Caribbean writers. And this particular body of work is focused on the island of Nevis, single island in the sun.
Okay, so
And if
hold one second, Terry. I want to go back a step. So, and ask you, because I didn't ask you this question just now. Is it safe to say, while you were attending Taft and then you went to JFK, that your exposure to the two classes at JFK was the first time in this line of business?
Yes, well, yeah, that's the first place that I actually encountered photography, right? So my journey into the arts formally, I would say, began in high school. My journey into photography began in high school. I think I got the photo bug, if you will, when I took that photography and graphic design class at John F. Kennedy. It exposed me to two mediums, two ways of reproducing the world that I had never encountered before, and I was immediately drawn to them. Specifically graphic design, because graphic design, the class graphic design actually included drawing, formal drawing. So, for example, I still have like an image of like a drawing of my hand. One of the exercises we had to do was to place our hand on the table and then draw our hand as it landed. So, and I still have that drawing actually all the way from high school. So it was just fascinating to me, the ability for the eye and the hand to reproduce, the three-dimensional world on a two-dimensional surface. And then also the ability for this machine, really, the camera, to do the same thing, but in a different way. And so I was immediately, sort of drawn into those two ways of representing what my eyes saw.
So here it is. You went to JFK. You're taking these two courses. Now, what was the decision to take those two courses? Or is it that you were going to JFK to take courses, but you didn't know what they were?
No, I knew what they were, but what afforded me the opportunity to do it was that I had pretty much taken all of the required courses at Taft. And so I had some elective that I could fulfill. And they had a program in the New York City high schools at the time that if there was a class that wasn't offered at your local or your home school, that you can see someplace else, then you can just go and take that class. So I would literally leave like the last, before the last two periods, and would travel by train to the to another school. And it's interesting when you think about it, like they trusted you to show up, right? They gave you like a train pass and they say, go ahead and go to this school and take class, which I did, which was wonderful. The experience was amazing. I mean, I come from a background that there was no cutting school anyway.
That's right.
So, but that opportunity really really opened my world in a way that it wouldn't have, I think, if I didn't have the option to basically fill in some electives that I had the opportunity to.
So you got the bug bite.
Yes, for the bug bite.
Decided to continue doing this.
Yes.
At college.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. So when I got to NYU, naturally I sought out the program that had photography, and this was the Tisch program. And what was unique about that program, because actually it was a new program at the time. When I was there, I was maybe the third class of photography majors at Tisch, and they were very specific in terms of how they shape the the coursework, your curriculum there, you were engaged in studying both the history and the practice of photography, and not just the practice as a fine art, but as a commercial art, and also obviously, its history and its theory. So students who graduated from Tisch photography program at the time, had a choice whether they wanted to go be a commercial photographer, a fine art photographer, whether they wanted to be a photojournalist, as some of my classmates, whether they wanted to be to work at an auction house as an expert in the field of photography who can appraise its value. And so we had, like a multiplicity of options because of the curriculum that we were exposed to, which, like I said at the time, was not the case elsewhere. Other programs, I think, started to adopt that model later on, but Tisch was one of the first.
So you have a bachelor degree in photography from a bachelor degree in fine arts, to be more specific, from NYU, Tisch School of the Arts. And then you went to Hunter College, where you gained your Master in Fine Arts in Combined Media, which they're calling the fancy word now, multidisciplinary arts. Now, let me ask you this. What is important for us to know about how you use your expertise as an artist with your degrees in photography and combined media?
Well, it's the one thing to maybe keep in mind, or maybe the way you can think about it, is that with the combined media degree, what I got was an exposure to not just one, but several different disciplines. So, for example, in addition to getting better, learning photography in a more robust way, I learned printmaking. I learned book arts. I learned sculpture. I learned ceramics. Actually, believe it or not, ceramic was one of my joys when I was at Hunter. So talk about playing in mud, right? I mean, clay is really just a fancy word for mud in a way. So all of those things were aspects of techniques that I then incorporated into my own practice, both at Hunter, but also post-Hunter. So it basically broadened my visual vocabulary. I was able to, when I had a particular issue that I wanted to explore that maybe photography was unable to do in its entirety, I can now use what I would consider these adjacent medias, expand the vocabulary. And that's really what it did. It expanded my vocabulary and then allowed me to do some things that I wasn't able to do with one single media.
Let me ask you this, especially for myself, because I don't know a lot about your line of work. I'm an enthusiast in terms of visiting galleries and going to exhibitions and, touching stuff when they say don't touch it because you're trying to feel and see really what kind of material and that kind of a thing. And there's some of us who tag along with friends, who are artists and that kind of thing. So for those of us who need an education in understanding what are some of the aspects of the work to look at when we go to a gallery and an artist such as yourself work is being featured. How do you explain when we see a painting with a lock, right? A real piece of hair, a lock, plus a cutout picture from a magazine and a piece of cloth somewhere in there, and it comes out looking wonderful. And then, so some of us, and then some people might say, I don't get it. What is this about? What do you say to educate us?
So think about, and this is like something I deal with a lot with my own students. So when you look at a pictorial space, and this is sort of like a formal description, right, of that rectangle or that square, or circle sometimes, or maybe it's, it's not so, defined in terms of geometry. But when you look at that pictorial space, what you're looking at is a set of codes, visual images that communicate something specific, right? So if you have an image that's a conflation of a lock, maybe two other elements, essentially what the artist is inviting you to do is to consider how those elements come together and communicate something specific, right? It may be opaque, it may be something that you don't get right away, and sometimes that's intentional on the part of the artist because, and the way I look at it really is artists spend a lot of time making what they make. And so I think it's not too much to ask that the viewers spend an equal amount of time, deciphering the codes that are embedded in that piece of work. And maybe you don't get it the first time. Maybe the way you get it is through like a return to that piece, to observe it. And then as you grow as an individual, all of a sudden those experiences that you bring from elsewhere to that piece enriches your ability to experience it, So I mean, I often tell my students, for example, that, we bring our entire history to our practice or the experience of viewing a work of art or listening to a piece of music or looking at a movie or a theater show, right? And we see it through our particular lens because of the experiences that we've had as individuals. And so you and I standing in front of that same piece that I just described would think of it different. But here's what's enriching about that. And I'm glad that you bring some of your girlfriends with you when you go see art, right? Because then you'll turn to the person next to you and you say, I see so and so and so. Or what do you think about what they're trying to do with that lock? So the conversation that you have with the person next to you enriches both of your experience of that thing that you're looking at, because you both have different experiences, and the artists want you to have that conversation, both internally but also with each other while you are experiencing the work.
I'm glad that you said that too, because I was about to say that it generates conversation too, and a different type of education amongst
Absolutely.
the viewers in the gallery, because you're moving around and you're talking and you're comparing and you're contrasting and you sharing experiences and you're getting a different view, some other insights into the one piece that could be varied across the board. So yeah.
Because the work, it's an exploration of ideas, or sometimes it's an exploration of history, or maybe it's a personal narrative. There's so much that the work conveys. And again, the artist is giving it to you in these set of codes. Mm-hmm. You're aware of one thing, you latch on to one thing, and that leads you to sort of interpretation.
Yeah.
Again, based on a conversation you had, or based on something that you remembered, and then maybe, a year later, you look at that same piece, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I didn't even see that. And the reason why you didn't see it because you hadn't grown into that, the process of being able to decipher, what was being essentially presented to you.
So I want to do something different. Sammy, I want you to play back An Island in the Sun. And this time, Terry, I want you to focus on, tell us a little bit about, I think is it a cactus?
Yes.
With the eggshells, and I'm drawn to that because to me that's a Caribbean thing, where you see the eggshells on the tips of the cactus. I don't know if I'm describing it properly. And although I would love to talk about the masqueraders, I think I want us to look at the such a toss up between the treadmill tower, because I don't know what's going on there. And maybe I might ask you about the curtain window, but I want us to just get a quick refreshers by looking at that slideshow, but we'll pay attention to the cactus and the windmill tower. Sammy, could you run that quickly for us, please, so we can refresh? You know, Terry, all of these pieces are, I mean, they're conversational pieces. And I really want us to go through your bodies of work that we plan to discuss. Briefly, tell us about the cactus and that windmill tower.
Okay. So just maybe as for context, so the work itself, again called An Island in the Sun, it's really a visual exploration of the island of Nevis. So whenever I go back, I am basically just, hiking the island and making pictures that resonated with me in that moment. And some of it are mine from my memory, some of it are things that are new. This particular image that you see is an image that I found outside of the Museum of Nevis History. And so I had a conversation with the curator, and one of the things that he told me, which I think in the back of my mind, I knew that, but sometimes you forget things in the process of sometimes removal. You forget things, and something I'll talk about later. And so he basically told me that uh, there's a practice of putting eggshells onto this particular plant as a way of warding off evil spirits. And so that particular image had that a resonance, I should say, for me, because it's specifically connected to something that's ancestral, right? A practice that retains that connection to the past in the present. And a lot of the other images do some of the same things as well. So the other image, windmill, what you're looking at is you're looking at the windmill structure. The windmill is or was the engine of the plantation system. It was this thing that drove the commerce. So you would, if you looked at it, I mean, I have other images in which I deal with that structure itself, but it's you would use this. It was like a giant juicer. You feed the cane into these rollers that were basically being rotated by the movement of the windmill arms, the arms of the windmill. What you see in that image is what's left of that structure from the inside. So I am inside of this structure, which is basically like a conical shaped structure. The roof is gone. It's dark inside. And what you're doing is sort of looking up at this blue sky from inside of this dark hole. And it's for me, I wanted to visualize the feeling I had when I was inside of that space. It was a claustrophobic space. I mean, I can almost feel, if for some of you may understand what I'm saying, you can feel the past inside of that structure. The sort of the heavy weight of that history of the sugar plantation system. And so me looking up out of this structure was a way of kind of of escape, of yearning for something other than this psychological feeling that I felt when I was inside of it.
I'm glad that you gave us that explanation, because in some ways there was that a branch hanging over.
It was actually what we call growing up a whisk, with a vine. We call it whisk.
Vine. Okay. A vine, right? But it looked more like if it's a setup for somebody to be hung.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I took from it. So when you said it was a windmill, something, I was like, how could it be? But now that you're explaining is that from perspective, where you were,
Absolutely.
and what it means and what is left of it, it really does resonate. And and I just need to throw this in, although we're not going to talk about it. Man, that photograph of the car plates,
Oh,
the plates.
It's I mean, just briefly, I can just describe it as the visualization of neocolonialism.
That's
Those,
deep, Terry.
those plates are from like all over the United States, other places as well. So the backstory is that there's a place, a beachfront restaurant, where people, are encouraged to bring their own license plates, and they would basically tack them on the wall. And so wherever you come from, you bring your plate and you put it there. So it's basically it's an example of all the people who are coming to the island. But the reason why I describe it as neocolonial is because the tourism industry, and it's not a popular perspective, I know, for some people, but the tourism industry have replaced the plantation system.
Mm.
So I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm glad you're in the business that you are to showcase that kind of stuff, because I don't think that John Public, no offense to the Johns who are my friends, I don't think that John Public would see that as an image that needs to be noted in a significant way because of what it speaks to.
And again, and that's okay, So that is the sometimes the challenge of the photographic image, is that what you, the photographer, wants it to be imbued with sometimes is not how the public perceives it, right? So I have a particular perspective, a particular reason why I made that image, but it's completely okay for me if somebody sees something different. I am not beholden to my own interpretation of the image, because I understand that once that image becomes a part of the public domain, the public will look at it as I described earlier, how they choose to, because again, they are bringing their history to that image, and their history is not my history. My responsibility basically is just to embed the image with all of the content, if you will, that I think is necessary to make it both an aesthetic object, but also an object of deep inquiry, because it transcends just what you see. But what those other perceptions and interpretations are going to be particular to the individual who's looking at it.
Ah, gosh, I am in school, Professor Boddie. I'm in class. Let's take a peek at some more of your work, Professor Boddie. So for those of you who joined us after we started, I'm sitting with Terry Boddie, who is a photographer at heart, multidisciplinary artist, scholar, educator, and someone who just loves what he does. Terry, I love this body of work that we just saw. And I would describe it as a classic. I mean, I don't recall where I got that from, because to me, most black and white, to me, it's classical for me, most black and white photographs. But before we talk about this body of work that I believe you call gelatin silver, am I correct? Okay. I want to ask you about your experience as a darkroom printer earlier in your career, from 1993 to 1997, when you worked at Fairchild Publications. Tell us briefly about that.
Yeah, that was an interesting job. Actually, that I was prepared to do, because actually my training at NYU. So what I did was basically I both processed film and printed images for the various trade publication that Fairchild published. Fairchild was basically a publishing house that they publish daily and weekly publications, sometimes monthly, of various aspects of the fashion industry. So it was literally like working at a newspaper, So sometimes you had like a 10-minute turnaround, like a half an hour turnaround for some of the printing that you had to do. And so you had to react quickly. You had to know, what you were doing. So, and most of us who were working there, we were able to sort of look at a negative, against the light and make an evaluation of where to start with your timer and your aperture, which basically the aperture measures the light, the timer basically measured the duration that light impacts the surface, the paper. So you had to work quickly, and you had to be able to add and subtract light, which we in photography call burning and dodging. Because the clients, the editors want that image so that they can basically take it to the next step, which was to to mark it up and put it into the publication. So it really improved my printing skills. And when I started to teach, it actually prepared me to teach some of the foundation classes in photography, because I was able to basically just tell a student, like, okay, so you have this image. Okay, so tell me again, what's the time? What's the aperture? What's the filter you used? And very quickly look at the image and give them an evaluation so that they go back, and then they come back out of the darkroom with this puzzled look on their face, like, how did you know? But it's that training and that practice, the training at NYU, but the practice at NYU and at Fairchild that prepared me for teaching, actually. And so it was a lot of pressure, but it really like sharpened my technical photographic skills in a way that I was able to translate that to my work undergraduate level and beyond.
I'm listening to you and I'm reflecting on your bio, and I'm thinking, what an awesome journey, because we just talked about your experience as a darkroom printer. And then I want to flip to your first exhibition where you showed your work, your body of work. And it was in 1989 when you exhibited at 4th Street Photo Gallery as a fine arts photographer. And your theme was about your feelings of alienation in New York City and the psychological impact of feeling isolated while not quite grounded in the urban environment in New York City. That's heavy, Terry. And you said that this was portrayed through black and white photography, which is what we just saw with the gelatin silver.
Right.
But I'm also thinking, okay, dark room, right? Dark room printer, being in a dark space in this big New York City and doing an exhibition that really talks to your darkness, in the psychological frame. And here we have this great body of work that I don't think have a connection, but I'm making a connection because I'm on the outside looking in. So tell us, what is an analog? Because I know that's a fancy word that is in your vocab that some of us don't know about.
Right.
Tell us. Go ahead.
It's a term that came about after digital photography emerged. So before digital photography came on the scene, there was just black and white photography or color photography. And maybe the descriptives, a C print, a Cibachrome, a gelatin silver. But once digital photography came about as an invention, you had to distinguish between almost like before digital, after digital. So black and white and color photography that we were made using a camera that was non-digital was considered analog. So think about analog music and digital music. Analog music would be, say, a vinyl, right?
Uh-huh.
The music would be something that you're streaming now on one of the streaming services. So it's
Okay.
the description of the platform the which produces the image.
All right. So I'm
Uh,
being a very slow student right now,
okay, that's
Terry.
fine. Mhm.
So the analog is kind of sort of connected to a type of camera too.
That's absolutely
It
film
is.
camera, film-based camera.
Ah, you
So
see,
anything
you
that's
said
film,
that, and
yes,
you said that right away, I would have gotten it.
exactly, yes. So it's yeah, exactly. I just kind of I took a long road
That's
around to
fancy.
yeah. So anything that's film-based, images made or recorded on celluloid or on Polaroid,
Uh-huh.
uh, versus image that are recorded on a digital sensor.
Got
So it's
it.
a platform of recording that supports the descriptive between analog and digital.
I got it. I got it because I read your bio and I'm reading your stuff and I'm thinking I'm seeing analog, 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 and I didn't stop to research it because I wanted you to teach us because I know I'm not alone. There are some of my friends, and I know that one of my colleagues in the arts said you need to ask him what is a good camera.
Mm,
So we'll talk about that at the end because
okay.
I'll ask you to give some advice on some of my friends who want to buy a camera.
Okay.
Now, what is appealing for you
Mm.
about analog or black and white photographs? What about it?
Well, interestingly enough, uh, it's the space in which it is practiced. And not just in terms of the when the image is recorded, but all the other steps that leads to the image, right? So it was for I love silver. The technical ingredient in film is silver halide crystal suspended in gelatin. So the same kind of gelatin that you would make Jello from, basically. So that's what you have on film, and the silver traps the light. When you print an image, it's printed on silver or paper that have a silver content. And so when you see the sort of luminosity of the surface, what you're seeing is basically light impacting the surface and giving it that glow. Uh, that's something that they have not quite yet achieved. They've achieved a sort of a similarity, but it's not quite the same with digital paper. But beyond that, I love being in that space, that dark space. I refer to it as like a space of incubation. The dark room is the space in which possibility exists in terms of what you bring outside into the light. uh, and it's just time basically, like, talking about time slowing down. Time is irrelevant except the time it takes to make the image inside of the dark room. So normally you would, when you go into a dark room, you would notice that the the clocks are not set to the right time. The clocks only exists for you to time the process of development of the paper, right? It might be 4 o'clock, but the time is set to like 10, right? Because time is irrelevant now in terms of what the outside world requires. You're supposed to be attentive to what's going on in front of you. And so one of the things I tell my students now, I mean, is to just turn off your phone. Leave your phone like in your bag. Just don't even like look at it. Like when you hear, all your attention should be, engaged in this process of alchemy, which is really what black and white, analog, and color photography is. It's about coaxing these colors and tones out of these surfaces and out of this film
So I
in
have
in
to
which.
ask you, I have to ask you, Terry, before we talk about gelatin silver, when you did your first exhibition,
Yeah,
was it black and white by chance?
it was black and white. It was black and white. The title of the exhibition actually was I think I was being dramatic. It was called "In the Shadow of the Light." That's what you get when you go to a school in which history and theory is like courage. And so what you always see is the symbolic element of what you produce, not just the description.
But it would make you stop and think, though, Terry. I mean, it really
Well,
sounds sexy.
right.
Shadow of the light.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, and again, what I was trying to do really is, which led to my graduate work, was trying to describe a psychological state with this technology that only gives you a single moment in time.
Mhm.
Right? So how could you like imbue this image that's a fraction of time with all of this stuff that you're feeling as as this immigrant person in this urban landscape? Like, how do you do it, right? And so what you're using are what we consider indexes, and the thing that refers to something else. So the shadow is basically the absence of the body, right? The shadow is an index, it's the absence of the body. So a lot of times what you see in the images are shadows of people, silhouettes of people. You can't recognize them. There are, mirages of themselves, and they were supposed to represent, this sort of psychological state that I was in.
So I'll ask Sammy to just run the slideshow of gelatin silver again, just to refresh. Which two would you want us to quickly talk about of gelatin silver?
We could talk about, you could maybe Grandma's Hand
Uh-huh.
is a good one, and then Feet Hands is another.
Okay. All right. So Sammy, could you play for us? So this is Grandma's hand,
Yes.
and this is hand feet. So you'll talk about those two. All right. So tell us about Grandma's hand.
So actually, that was an image that was made some years ago at the African Street Festival in Brooklyn, actually. And as most photographers, we work with our cameras, and when things crosses our field of vision that we think are important, we record them. And so I saw this woman who was old enough to be the child grandmother, so hence the title, right? So they're walking away from me, and I got one image of the entire scene with them. So you saw the wider context of them within the scene, and then I walked a bit closer and got that image that you saw. And I think for me, in the way I describe it as such, because I think maybe for me was I remember seeing my grandmother holding my younger cousin's hand in the same way, right? So that kind of it's a way that the elders have a way of kind of holding you. There's care, but there's also protection as well, right? And you as a child, when you feel that hand on you, there's a sense of safety, knowing that there's someone hit there who's sort of looking out for you. So I kind of wanted to to highlight that that care that exists between generations in this case.
What about hand feet?
Yeah, the elder, and then hand feet was two individuals who appeared to be lovers who were just engaging in touch as a way of expressing, their emotions, their feelings towards each other. And for me, a lot of, I think it's important that we show those aspects of our blackness, of our interior space, if you will. I think a lot of times when we think of the black body, we think of the black body, as being, under stress, in danger, and those things are important to highlight. And there are a lot of photographers that do highlight those aspects of the black body. But I think the black body is also to be, celebrated in other ways. That we love each other, we care for each other, we touch, we embrace, we protect. And so, when you see my work, you'll see the range of those depictions.
I have to ask you quickly, were you an innocent bystander or did they pose for you?
They did not pose. We were occupying the same space. They knew I had a camera. They saw me photographing. So I had permission, if you will. And that's an important question because, and it's a question I engage with my students a lot in terms of the ethics of recording someone, even if it's someone right? Like how do you, create that space that encourages them giving you permission. It's something that I think a lot about for myself. And as I grow as a photographer, I think back on some of the images that I got where I didn't ask permission, right? And those images were important images, I find. But I think the more I develop as an image maker, the more I find it necessary to kind of think of the process of making pictures differently. Think of the agency that you allow the subject in the process of recording them.
Terry, you mentioned a very important point there, and I feel as though I'll just drop this nugget and then leave it alone because we can have another 2 hours of this particular issue I said, forget topic, issue that I'm about to bring up. The age of social media platforms where people are snatching and taking pictures of strangers and putting it on their platforms and making fun of people that they don't even know. I find that so offensive. I mean, what were we doing before we had these mobile phones with cameras?
We were not doing that, right? And so, but that practice, I mean, yes, I know you wanted to leave that nugget, but let me just say this. As an educator, it's something that I have to address in my classes. Like, what is your role in that process? And basically, how would you feel if someone did that to you? I mean, it's like an old way of kind of, creating self-awareness, right? Yeah. So yeah, it's a conversation that I have to have with my students because that too is photography, right? It may not be the kind of photography that exists within the academic spaces, the way in which we think of photography, but it has its place, and you can't ignore it. You can't ignore the fact that there's a device that you have in your hand at all time that allows you to record what's in front of you, and that you have a kind of agency to do so. And yes, and there's been good things that have come out of that practice, right?
Yeah.
So we're not going to say it's all bad, but we have to kind of analyze. We have to pick it up and turn it around. Yeah. Because there are obviously ways that you can use a camera that works, and ways that you can do it differently.
Oh, so loving the education, Terry. Just loving the education. Let's take a peek at some more of your work. How about that?
Okay.
I think we'll look at residual memory now, I think. we just saw what you call residual memory. But before we talk about residual memory, I wanted us to talk about your initial involvement in academia as briefly as possible. Because in 1998, you entered academia via your alma mater, New York University, and you're still teaching there as we speak. Aside from hearing how you landed this job, I am wondering, how was your experience teaching for the first time at that level?
Yeah. It's a good question, right? Because in a way, I think it might be tempting to think that I had no preparation for it. But in fact, when I was in graduate school, I was teaching assistant to two of the most accomplished artists of their generation, Roy de Carava and Juan Sanchez. So basically, I learned how to teach from being their teaching assistant in graduate school and watching them how they conduct a class, how they were able to sort of pull certain things from students, maybe some students who didn't want to participate or some students who they thought they had nothing to add, but their strategies around teaching, and it was so instrumental to me. And so I kind of used their teaching methodology as a model when I first started, and then grew into my own, right? And I think that's kind of what they expect you to do on the graduate level. So you model, and then you sort of build your own language, your own particular approach. But even before I started teaching, I taught workshops. I taught workshops for with kids at the Children Arts Carnival in Harlem, and yeah, there were young kids, youngsters, and so maybe the expectation wasn't the same as college level kids. But what it definitely did was taught me patience, right? When you're teaching like 8-year-olds, you gotta have a lot of patience, and there's a lot of repetition, and a lot of putting out fires, if you will.
So let's talk about residual memory. I want to ask you, as I asked Sammy to run it again, so that we can have a point of reference. What do you want us to know about this body of work? And I'm going to ask you to select one piece. So okay. Sammy, could you run it for us? And Terry, you'll tell us. I think this is script. Is that right, Terry?
Actually, this is Crown and Glory. This is script.
This is script. Okay. Yes. And this is what? Ferry?
Ferry.
Okay. And this is Jumbi. And what is this one?
Sanctuary.
Sanctuary. This one is School Days. Okay. So which one you want us to talk about?
Okay, maybe Jumbi, because I knew that you were.
Yeah, I'm glad you chose that one.
Yeah, I'll choose that one. That was actually one of the early pieces that I did. I did that piece at the Student Museum when I was in residency, and it's interesting that piece. There was someone who saw that piece in that show, and they tracked me down for like 2 months to get it. It resonated with them so strongly that they felt that this is the piece that they needed to live with. But it's a piece that brings together a number of elements. So it brings together charcoal, which is the body. The body of the figure is actual charcoal. The media charcoal. The background is ink. The face is an actual leaf on which have been uh, layered gelatin silver emulsion. So imagine photo paper, the object photo paper, the surface of photo paper as a liquid that you could then put on almost any surface and create a sensitized photographic surface. So basically, I made uh, a sensitized photographic surface out of a leaf. And it was actually a leaf that I brought back from Nevis on my first trip there. You know, and it's so this was part of the, like I said, my early work right after graduate school, right when I was at the Student Museum. And Jambi, if for those of you who don't know, basically is our word, a vernacular word for spirit in the Caribbean. And what you see here is a person who is supposed to be presenting as a spirit, but not in the kind of scary, fearsome way that we tend to think of spirits, but as someone who's occupying a space, you know, whether that space is a psychic space, or for some people who claim to be able to see spirit, uh, you know, it might appear in a certain way. But it's the leaf itself is, you know, refers to, you know, that the kind of you know, healing possibilities of of the Caribbean space. You know, so again, it's not meant to be a scary image.
Right.
Uh, so I see nature as something that we, you know, we coexist with. You know, I see the spirit world as something, or a place that we can coexist with as well. The face that you see is uh is an image that exists in its original form as a tiny pendant that would hang on the hip of the Queen Mother in the Benin Kingdom. So the actual image is like this small, but I made a negative out of it and used that negative to print onto the leaf. So essentially what I'm doing is going to sort of bring in iconography, visual iconography from across the Atlantic, uh, you know, referring to, you know, a culture that made its way across the Atlantic, you know, in the transatlantic Atlantic slave trade, and using that image to talk about, you know, things that are specific to the Caribbean geography.
I like that. I like that nudge that you gave about the transatlantic slave trade, because you have a body of work about that too, which I am so fascinated about. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Absolutely.
Let's take another peek at your work, because we're getting into I think we are leaving smoke and getting into fire now. If I'm if I'm getting into the whole Caribbean vernacular.
Right.
So let's watch. And this is called Coleman.
Coleman, the series Coleman.
Mhm. For those of you who joined late, thank you for coming. And I'm sitting here with Terry Boddie, who is a multidisciplinary artist, a photographer at heart, a scholar, a person who has an artist who's had over 40 years in the arena of photography. So also known as an expert. So Terry, this is one of my favorites of your bodies of work, one of them.
Okay.
And I'll be asking you later, so you know what fascinates you about coals? I'll ask you that.
Yeah.
But I'm curious because from 2002 to 2008,
Mm-hmm.
as a visiting professor, you taught undergrad and grad courses at William Patterson University in Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
These photographic courses spanned analog, digital, and alternative process, historical processes, and you've been really doing a clear job of bringing the historical pieces into your work, which I love because I don't think many individuals, or some individuals, I should say, some individuals don't think about that historical piece
Mm-hmm.
when looking at a body of at an artist's body of work, unless there are probably some little nugget tags along the way that helps to influence your thought about the body of work. Um, you talked about analog, you talked about digital. What is considered the alternative process or historical processes? Quickly tell us.
Good question, because that I should say those processes, the ones I use, are instrumental in how you think about uh, the images that make up residual memory. Because essentially what I'm doing is using processes that were invented at the beginning of photography's invention in 1839. So when photography was invented, the processes that were used are quite different from the ones we use now. There were several competing technologies. And I call it technology because that's what it was. There were scientists who were experimenting with these different ways of fixing an image on a surface, right? I mean, and that was the goal. How do you fix an image that is reflected through a hole, aperture, into a box, and as it's reflected into that box, if you've done pinhole photography, you've probably seen it in action, right? As it's reflected into the box, either through a pinhole or through a lens, being able to fix it on a sensitized surface, right? So many experiments were done, and eventually in 1839, uh, the scientists, I mean, we didn't call them photographers then, they were just scientists, Niepce, was able to do that. And that became a series of inventions that basically built on what he did and allowed, what we do today to be, possible. But when I use these processes, what I'm doing is referring to, what I consider the materiality of photography, its ability to be both a physical object, but also as a way of referring to a specific historical time, and also having the the audience think of what they're looking at as not a single moment in time, but an accumulation of different moments in time. Right. So I call it, my students will hear me say sometimes, I call it my suspicion of the ability for the photograph to contain the totality of what you want it to, right? So a photograph is a fraction of time, right? What I do is I accumulate different moments in time and put them together in the same pictorial space as a way of, in a way, building layers, right? And I think that came out of my experience doing the show In the Shadow of the Light, and really wasn't able to do, or at least to communicate fully what I was feeling in just a single analog black and white image. They became like really beautiful aesthetic objects. They were beautifully rendered black and white prints, but the audience wasn't really able to kind of, dig beneath the surface and really excavate what it is that was trying to communicate. But with residual memory, I can bring different iconography into the same place. And much like the image that you described, being able to see a lock with two other elements in the same space, all of a sudden invite a conversation or invites a longer process of examination that hopefully yields some interpretation of what it is I'm trying to communicate. And so that's how I came to that process. But a lot of those process use a lot of those images, I should say, use older processes that even predated film.
Wow.
Like celluloid film that we think. So I'm basically preparing my own sensitized surfaces by applying emotions that were invented in the 1850s, in the 1860s, and using that as a way to build my visual language. And also, keeping in mind too that when these processes were invented, which is sometimes part of the work that I do, our position as African people within history, right? What were we doing in the 1850s and 60s as African individuals when these technologies were being developed? And so I'm very mindful that essentially what I'm doing is a lot of times, correcting the record in terms of, for example, the representation of of of, uh, of the Black body within the scope of history, which tend not to be very flattering if you were to look at some of those early photographs.
What I'm hearing you say and reinforcing for some of us is the importance of your work, is the importance of photography, is importance of the artist's work, that it's not just picking up a canvas or picking up whatever material you want to use as the backdrop for your work and then just throwing things together. There's actually a science to this. There is knowledge that you have to know to do justice to this type of work. And sometimes folks shy away from going to exhibitions, going to galleries, because they feel, it's just a piece of something put together or something like that, and they wave it away. And what some people don't understand is that when you do that, when you wave it away, you wave away your history. That's what you're doing, So I'm so happy that you gave that thorough explanation about how the historical processes work are embedded in your work. Let's talk about Coleman. What fascinates you about Coleman, and I know this is going to be a tough one because it's close to your heart. Which one, if you had to choose one of your images, which one?
Okay. So I came to this series actually. I don't think it was by accident. I'm one of those people who don't believe in accidents when it comes to the creative.
All right, 1 second, Terry. Let's do this.
Okay.
Let's have Sammy roll it again.
Yeah.
Sammy, take down the volume, and Terry, if you want to tell us anything about it so that viewership would know what we're looking at, that'll be great. And then we'll come back and you'll talk about how meaningful this is for you.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah. So what you're looking at is a coal pit that is built. It's a structure that's built, and what you're looking at is an individual in the process of building that structure. Here he is emerging out of the bush with wood and vegetation that's put onto this structure in order to slow down the burn. And this is the finished structure. This is how it looks. This is one end of it that's lit and burning. And this is him waiting. And here, another version of what I call the long wait, and I'll explain what I mean by that. And this is the pit before all of these things are added to it. And this is the finished product, coal.
So which one of these you want to talk about, Terry?
Uh, I think you know what? I'll talk. I can talk about the what I call the long wait, which is him sitting down, looking at the pit. Because what it symbolizes is the degree of patience that this process requires. And essentially, what he's doing is stacking wood. He's putting green vegetation on top of that wood. He's putting soil on top of that green vegetation. He lights it at one end. He watches the smoke. If it's burning too fast, he put more soil, more vegetation. He's piling vegetation on top of it. When it gets a certain height, he places the stones around it to keep it together. And then he just sits there and wait. And sometimes the wait can take up to 2 hours. But what he's waiting, what he's watching and waiting for, uh, you know, is for to see how the smoke that's emerging at the opposite end is trailing out. Is it moving too quickly? Is it moving very slowly? So what he wants is almost no smoke, because that will tell him that basically the fire that's contained within this mound, which I call like the space of possibility, is slow. It's a slow fire. What you want is a slow burn. And when he can gauge that it's slowed down to the point where it's basically carbonizing the wood and not basically burning it to ash, that's when he closes up the end that's been lit. And so that end is the end basically on the windward side of the mound. And the wind is basically just pushing the flames through the entire mound. So basically what he's doing in the process of alchemy, you can call it, but it's really just science, is he's making charcoal from wood, from basically from green wood. And he's basically burning it at such a rate that he's creating carbonized wood as opposed to ash. And this is an old process. This is something that Caribbean people
Yeah.
doing since the time of enslavement. It's still being done in places like Haiti, in places like West Africa, in Eastern Europe. Actually, the Irish have a different approach to it. They use kiln as opposed to mounds. But before the Industrial Revolution, essentially, that was one of the fuels that people used for cooking.
Yeah.
Uh,
You
and
know, I just want to jump in, Terry. You know, I think I mentioned to you coal miner. I think that's what we call that person in Guyana who did
right,
that.
okay,
And I don't have, and I'm showing myself here, I don't have a lot of knowledge about how coal is made in Guyana and all of that, but
right,
I've had the experience of using a coal pot,
of course, right,
which is there in the Caribbean, right?
right.
And it's the cold that really gives us that fire to cook the pot on it, right? But I just wanted to say that. But tell us, you say coal man, and I'm thinking you say coal man for a reason. And if I'm not mistaken, you have a very close
Relationship, yeah.
relationship with,
Have
yeah.
a, I will have a relationship. I don't know about a close relationship, but I do have a relationship with him. Well, I just call him Coal Man because I think calling him the Coal Man is basically a nod to his his personhood, but also to his profession. So he's a coal man. That's what he does. I mean, he will probably tell you that that's who he is. And by the way, his name is Cutbirth Clark. So he actually has a name.
Love it. Yes.
Cutbirth Clark. Everybody calls him Bra. That's his nickname, which everybody knows you by your nickname back home, right? He went to school with my aunts. And he was taught how to do this method of making coal by my grandfather.
Wow.
Right, my grandfather was a coal man. That's one of the things he did, and so I have a close connection to that practice of coal making, and to him through my grandfather. And my grandmother, after my grandfather passed, herself made charcoal. So she was a coal woman, right? So we have that tradition within our family.
Is there anybody else in your family who is in the coal business?
No, it's I mean, there's no one younger than him that wants to do it.
Is there a place for colds though in Nevis?
There's no economy for it. Everyone cooks with gas, and the only places that actually uses it are the resorts. So the resort is only customers, because people don't even use it, to cook food anymore. Even though, as we know, some food you ever tasted,
Yeah. When you cook with coals, the food taste is different.
it tastes different for
It's
sure.
different. And before we take another peek at your work as we are wrapping this up, I gotta make mention of what you call a machete or machete. We call it a cutlass in Guyana. A cutlass. All
Yeah,
right.
it could change it. We call it cutlass. We call it machete.
Yeah.
This is short form of machete, which is the Spanish.
Spanish version. Yeah. Of it. All right. So let's take a peek, and then we come back and we talk some more about your work and wrap this up.
Yeah.
Harry,
Uh-huh.
confession time.
Okay.
We just saw your body of work blueprints.
Right.
Confession,
Uh-huh.
my favorite
Mm,
of all the work that I've seen
interesting.
that you've done. Yes. But before we talk about blueprints,
Mhm,
and I'll ask Sammy later on to run it again so that you can tell us what we're looking at.
mhm.
You've had experience of 9 years at SUNY Empire State College, where you teach as a visiting assistant professor, and you're currently teaching the courses Contemporary Photography, Photographic Narratives, and History of Black Photographers, 1840 to present. And a few minutes ago, you really gave us a historical overview of photography. Um, now, this is Black History Month. I have to say it.
Right,
This
right.
is Black History Month, and I'm also thinking of the fact that you teach history of Black photographers, the course,
Mhm.
history of Black photographers, 1840 to present. I have to ask you, as an expert in the field of photography, in a few sentences, and I know this is a stretch when I say in a few sentences because we can take a whole class on this.
Yeah.
How
Mhm.
has Black photography progressed? Might be a loaded question too.
Uh, I think, well, I'll answer it this way. It depends on where I would say it depends on the context, right? So, and the reason I said that is, so Black photographers have been making images within this medium since 1840. So that's a year after its invention, right? And they've made those images continuously up to the present. So when you talk about its progression, what you, I think, referring to is its place or its visibility within the mainstream.
Mhm.
But the fact is that, we've always been here. We've always been honing our craft. We've always been practicing our work. We've always been making images for our communities, for our families. Other people have not been afforded those images the attention that they deserved. So the progress that you talk about is the progress within the mainstream of photographic practice, or maybe visual culture. That visibility is for, obviously, because they're not afforded a place at the table most of the time. And so what Black photographers have been doing is correcting the record, both within the academy like I do, or and me following basically the lead of someone like Dr. Deborah Willis, who have pretty much written the history of Black photographers. I actually use her seminal textbook. Uh, uh, what's the which actually has the same title, same subtitles,
Mhm.
for my course. That's I use her book basically in my course, because it's the most comprehensive history of Black photographers in this theater, at least in the American context. But it extends beyond that, and photographers of color in general have been making images, for a very long time. So I think it's up to us for uh, to make sure that we are visible. And I think we've been doing it, we've been finding ways to do it. As I said, correcting the record and becoming visible. Having our own platforms for showing our work, and not solely depending on the mainstream of visual culture and the gatekeepers basically to show our work. Because if you do that, you'll be disappointed because those agendas sometimes does not align with your own. But the fact is, if you look at the landscape on something, if you know where to look, you realize that the work that have been produced by Black photographers, photographers of color, is on a par and sometimes surpasses that produced by the mainstream culture. So it's a matter of context sometimes when you look at that question.
Yeah, thanks. Sammy, could you run Coleman again? And could you tell, and Terry,
Mhm.
tell us which one you will, I'm sorry, run Blueprints again, sorry. Blueprints, and Terry, could you tell us what's going
Okay.
on the
So
photograph that we'll see?
So this series uses one of those early photographic processes that I was talking to you about earlier, and it's called a cyanotype. And it was a process that was used to make architectural blueprints,
Mhm.
hence the title of the series, Blueprints.
Okay.
And when I think about cyanotype, I think of its role in basically creating these systems of confinement and oppression, like the transatlantic slave uh, trade, but
Mhm.
also the prison industrial complex, or even something like public housing that was used to conveniently house the descendants of those enslaved Africans who made their way from the South and from the Caribbean and elsewhere, into the northern cities. And so you had to find a place for them within those spaces, and the housing project came about as a result. And so, I want you to think of this system and this history as something deliberate, as something that was basically thought of, planned, and executed. And the description blueprint basically speaks to that in a direct way.
Which of them was
I can talk about. I guess I can talk about the one. So there's two in the middle that I call Prison Industrial One and Prison Industrial Two, and what you see is like a conflation of three different codes of references, iconography, right? So all the time, bringing different visual references into the same pictorial space. Same thing I did with residual memory. It's just in a different way. So I'm bringing these three things, sometimes there's four in this case, within the space. It's the slave ship diagram. So it's a diagram that shows how the slaves were packed in the ship's holes in the journey across the Atlantic. I'm combining that with a barcode, which is a barcode is a symbol of commerce, uh, much like the QR code within our modern day society. And then the prison bars, which essentially that system, the prison industrial complex, have replaced the uh, the system of chattel slavery because the 13th Amendment provides a clause that says that you are free as a black body, as a black individual, you're free except if you're convicted of a crime. And so because of that clause that was written into the 13th Amendment, basically to benefit the planters, the Southern planters, there've been a harvesting of black bodies for the prison system as a way, first to fuel the prison farm, and that's what they were called, the prison farms. The plantation that were basically turned into prison farms. Those bodies were used when they were rounded up for minor offenses to work on those prison farm places like Angola prison, for example, in the South. And now that have been converted into these bodies who are working within the prison industrial complex. And there's many companies actually. To a degree, we're all complicit in this because sometimes we don't even know that some of the products that we use are made with prison labor. But then there's another layer to this, is that there are two companies now that are for-profit prisons that trade on the New York Stock Exchange, or the Stock Exchange in general. So you were able to buy prison stocks, right? And if that's not a sort of update of chattel slavery, I don't know what is, right? Because it's the prison system basically have been commodified and turned into an industry to replace the system of chattel slavery. So those images deal with that practice, the way one have basically led to another. And there's been a lot of scholarship done about it. There's a movie that I would recommend that a book that I recommend that you look at. So Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow, possible in this industry.
So as we get ready to wrap up, I want to do one more run of this because this is really exciting work that you do, Terry, really deep and educational. I want to ask Sammy to run Blueprint again. And folks, I'm asking you to pay attention to the bars that Terry talks about. And if I'm not mistaken, some of the images also have bodies. If you look closely, you're looking at bodies. So I want you to look with these different set of lenses now. Sammy, could you run Blueprint again? So these are bodies.
These are the bodies, and then there's the housing project on the top. So the slave icon on the bottom, and what you see here is well, the exercise book, the language system. Here you see the codes, the trading symbols of those two companies that I talked about that traded on the stock exchange. And then these last two images, well, this and the very last one, this is basically a remake of the American flag. I call it Stars and Stripes. And this is another version of the Blueprint image with that building. And this last image is actually an extension of the Blueprint image, but in this one, I'm talking about how the transatlantic slave trade is related to the Windrush project, if you will. That project in which individuals from the former British colonies, like the Caribbean and Asia, were brought to Great Britain after the war to basically repopulate the factories. And they were bought by this ship called the Windrush. My mother actually was one of those second generation Windrush individuals. But they were basically, they were used as labor. And if you have to remember, if you are a British subject, you're not a British citizen. It's a distinction to be made, right? And so there was a controversy recently, if you remember, when those individuals were in danger of being sent home, them and their kids. So much like the previous administration tried to send back, the dreamers, the Windrush generation were in danger of being sent home because there was legislation that was written to basically do just that, right? And so you can see how, once your body is no longer profitable, you're sort of basically,
Mhm.
disposed of. And so that's basically what. Uh,
Okay, so we have to wrap this up. Oh man, so thank you for joining us today. I want to say it was really great talking with you, Terry, and thanks for sharing the nuggets of knowledge. We were educated, and as I say thank you to you, I want to thank the viewers of Arts, Culture, and Things in Between. I also have to thank Claire Goring for the flyer, Marcio Gordon for a YouTube channel, Yastu Narain for the program building website, Dr. Raul Manzano for his hand work with the logo, Ghana Cultural Association for streaming this with us, and Ilushi Mystery this weekend. She knows why. Thanks to Sammy, the man behind this, for doing this with us every week. I want to thank all of you who joined us today. Those of you who will view the recorded version, thank you. Hope you bring a friend next week and like us on Facebook, like YouTube, visit the website at roseoctober.com. I am your host saying thank you for joining us. And Terry, you get the last word to tell them quickly where they can find you.
So thank you, Roz. Thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And you can find me at terrybody.com. You can see an extensive display of some of the work that you see there. So, yeah, I just look forward to sharing my work with you again when time
Thank you
permits.
so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Have a pleasant, productive, and safe week.